Welcome to episode number 5 of the End of Life Journey series. The topics that will be covered in this session are medically assisted deaths and the grief associated with it. In Canada, MAiD is the term used for medical assistance in dying. The grief associated with MAiD is unique, and I will explain the differences later in the video. Hello, my name is Leanna, and I'm here to share my lived experiences on this topic with you. This material is for educational purposes only. I do not encourage, promote, or endorse any specific course of action. I'm here to provide you with information which may help you make the informed decisions that will best meet your needs and wishes as you experience your end-of-life journey. Only you can make those choices. I encourage you to use this information to do further investigations into the circumstances and services in your area, because healthcare is a provincial and territorial responsibility, and each is unique. These videos are meant to be a starting place to help you map out your journey and deal with any roadblocks you may encounter along the way. In 1972, the Canadian federal government passed legislation that made suicide legal. However, it is still illegal to encourage or help someone commit suicide. People doing so will be charged with a criminal offense, and if found guilty, could be liable for imprisonment of up to 14 years. Leaving loved ones to suffer excruciating grief and questions without answers that may haunt them for the rest of their lives. While it remains your right to choose to commit suicide, I would ask that you please consider all the previous alternatives to suicide, which we have discussed in the preceding videos. I'd also like to present one more alternative: medical assistance in dying, also known as MAiD in Canada, or VAD, or voluntarily assisted dying in some other countries. It took more than 2 decades for Canadians to win the right to die with dignity on their own terms, and the battle continues to this day. In 1993, Sue Rodriguez, a BC woman battling ALS, challenged the validity of the Criminal Code of Canada to prevent citizens from seeking an assisted suicide under the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedoms. She lost her case, but as a result, the government formed several committees to study the issue over the following years. Dying with Dignity Canada has created a detailed timeline on their website under the tab Our History. If you are interested in more historical detail, go there for the information. Finally, on February 6th, 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada made a ruling that was a breach of human rights according to the Canadian Charter to prevent people from seeking a medically assisted death. This ruling came about after a challenge by Kay Carter and Gloria Taylor in 2011, arguing that it was a breach of rights to life, liberty, and security of the person as laid out in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. On June 17, 2016, the Canadian federal government passed Bill C-14 into law, allowing medically assisted dying all across Canada. To this day, we are fighting for changes to expand eligibility to access this human right. The current legislation, while an improvement over the original law, still does not reflect the direction of the Supreme Court. I had the privilege and honor of testifying before the federal MAiD Senate Committee on behalf of those of us who are physically disabled. The link to that testimony can be found at the end of the video. Unfortunately, that decision has been deferred to 2026, 2 years from now. I have my suspicions that the delay in passing more changes is politically motivated due to a potential election in the upcoming 18 months. Politicians may not want to face their electorate over these issues. I hope you will ask your MP what their position is on expanding MAiD accessibility during the election cycle. There are two types of medical assistance in dying in Canada. One is a medical procedure administered by a medical team led by a doctor or a nurse practitioner, and the other is self-administered. According to the Canadian government website, self-administered MAiD, the prescribing or providing by a physician or nurse practitioner of a substance to a person at their request so they may self-administer the substance and in doing so cause their own death. As of 2021, only 7 MAiD deaths were self-administered in Canada. Some people argue that the more MAiD is available, the more people will choose it, and ultimately family members may even try to force people to choose MAiD for their convenience. After many decades of research in countries where medically assisted deaths are available, that has been proven to not be the case. Canadian statistics reflect those of other countries. Typically, less than 4% of the population choose MAiD. In addition, no one can request MAiD on behalf of another person. Only the individual themselves can make that request, and even when they do, there are very strict protocols that include interviews and forms to be filled out before the procedure can be scheduled. The procedure can be canceled at any time, right up to the beginning of the first injection. Regardless of what those who oppose medically assisted deaths may say, there are no slippery slopes. People have the right to have a medically assisted death. People are not rushing to have MAiD. The statistics prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. My late husband, who was the first MAiD recipient on Prince Edward Island, said at the time of his procedure, "This won't be for everyone." Having gone through this procedure with my husband, I want to assure you that this is not something done on the spur of the moment. It takes months and in some cases even years, to make this momentous decision. It is not made lightly. Paul and I discussed this so many times. For him, it was a backdoor or escape hatch if all else failed as he battled cancer. He agonized over his decision and didn't request the procedure until all other treatment options had been tried and there was nothing else to do. Death was imminent. MAiD allowed him to die with dignity on his own terms at the time and place of his choosing. It was the right choice for him. In terms of self-administered MAiD, I can only share one story. A Canadian woman reached out to me. Her brother was choosing a medically assisted self-administered death. He and his family lived out on the West Coast in the United States, one of the states that permits medically assisted deaths. She was in touch with her brother and his family by video conference. After saying their goodbyes, her brother took the oral cocktail he had been prescribed. Unfortunately, a few minutes later, he began vomiting and then lost consciousness. They didn't know how much he had been able to ingest, so there was no way of knowing what might happen next. And all they could do was wait and see what would happen. It was agonizing for all concerned. However, after 6 hours in a coma, he finally died. It left everyone traumatized, but grateful that his final wish had eventually come true. If this is a route you choose, please make sure you have all possible outcomes covered. Even conventional MAiD procedures can have unfortunate mishaps. One family shared their story about getting ready for their father's MAiD procedure, and at the last minute, a serious problem arose. He was so dehydrated that they couldn't get a needle into a vein to administer the drugs for the procedure. Fortunately, after a 90-minute search, they were able to find a specialist who could help, and they were able to go ahead and successfully complete the process. It caused a lot of anxiety and tension for the entire family gathered at his bedside, but it did have a successful outcome eventually. My cautionary advice would be to have an advanced care plan in place and your power of attorney present just in case something untoward does occur. In the vast majority of cases that I know of, things have gone smoothly and the individual has died with dignity according to their specific wishes. I know one jazz lover and patron who threw a huge party and had live music playing as her procedure was administered. We had a family gathering and a final dinner together. One couple I know filled the room with candles and flowers as the woman's procedure took place. It was a private moment, meant just for the two of them. There are so many ways to die with dignity on your own terms. The possibilities are limitless. It is the ultimate celebration of a life well lived and a journey completed. Paul always called it his great adventure. He couldn't wait to find out what came next. For us, it was a very beautiful, intimate moment in time, a memory I will always cherish. My husband's medically assisted death was picture perfect. It was incredibly well organized by the doctor and the nurse. Everything went according to his wishes. I can honestly say he was excited and in amazingly good spirits. As Paul said, MAiD is not for everyone, but it was his choice and I respected it. Many times in the days leading up to his MAiD procedure, I had to remind myself that it was all about him, his end of life, his death, his choice. It wasn't about me or what I wanted. It was his time. As with any death, there is grief. However, MAiD grief is unique because the time, the date, and location are all known in advance, unlike other death experiences. Those involved experience something called anticipatory grief. I certainly experienced it as Paul's MAiD date came closer and closer. One day, I realized that I was already beginning to grieve, even though he was still here. I became aware that this was the last time we would do this together, or share that special meal, or celebrate this special occasion, and I felt incredibly sad. I began to anticipate his death and genuinely feel the grief, even though he hadn't died yet. This experience of anticipatory grief is very common, and it's important that everyone involved be aware of it because it can impact emotions and reactions at the time when everyone is feeling very vulnerable and sad. Knowing this could happen, family members and friends can change the way they approach those final days and ultimately the death that will occur during the medical procedure called MAiD. Having said that and experienced it myself, I didn't anticipate my own grief when I was told that I was receiving palliative care and that although my death wasn't imminent, it was nonetheless going to happen sooner rather than later. With my medical problems and now my cancer and diabetes diagnoses, with no treatment options available for the cancer, death has become a reality, not just some nebulous event that will occur sometime in the future. I must admit, I was taken aback when I realized that I had a best before date. My youngest son called it the rotting date, and that expression still makes me chuckle. However, I have come to accept that, like in Karen Barnes' booklet, Gone from My Sight, while I am moving away from those I love and will miss, I believe that I'm moving towards those that have gone before me and are waiting to welcome and embrace me on the other side. I have come to visualize my great adventure, the one Paul spoke of so often before he died. As I cross the veil through death to whatever awaits me on the other side, I now understand his excitement about impending death. And I too am curious about what comes next. And I am no longer experiencing anticipatory grief. As a family, we no longer take special occasions and family gatherings for granted. it's part of the dying and the separating process. Looking at death from a 5-degree shift in perspective, as Paul always said, it is really nothing more than a parting of the ways, a separation not unlike going on a trip. I believe that someday we will all be together once again. So now I anticipate the reunion with my loved ones, knowing that someday those that remain behind will make this journey too, and we'll all be together again. In 2017, a woman named Jan Ditchfield recognized the unique nature of MAiD death and the grief associated with it. In the early days, after the legislation was passed in 2016, some loved ones were denied access to grief counseling groups because of their individuals' personal religious beliefs that MAiD was suicide. As an aside, I cannot stress enough that MAiD is a medical procedure used to alleviate pain and suffering at the end of life, to allow the person to die with dignity, much like all those other things we've discussed in this video. DNRs, palliative sedation, palliative coma, VSE, VSED, to name but a few of the many ways the medical community supports us in a humane attempt to make the transition from life to death as painless and filled with dignity as is possible. It is our human right to die with dignity in the manner of our choosing. I can only hope that with education and knowledge, the public will begin to accept MAiD for exactly what it is: death with dignity on our terms. That's why this conversation and these videos about our end-of-life journey and death are so important, in my opinion. In addition, I want to mention that the federal government protects a person's right to choose MAiD, and that insurance companies cannot deny benefits to individuals who choose this end-of-life procedure. Death certificates, similarly, should note the underlying cause of the disease, not MAiD. I feel so fortunate that Jan Ditchfield recognized this need, which stemmed from her own personal experiences, and created a national organization called Bridge C14. Today, Jan, in addition to being the founder, is chairman of the board of this organization. Lauren Clark is the current president and CEO. Together, they are bringing a wide range of services and supports to Canadians who are experiencing the unique grief associated with MAiD deaths. There are links to them below. The Canadian Virtual Hospice are also providing many grief-related resources directly related to MAiD. I know this for certain because a couple of years ago I did a series of video interviews with them in my own home, which I believe are on their website. Both organizations provide online services and information that can be accessed by anyone all across Canada and throughout the world through the internet. I would like to thank both organizations personally for the much needed support they provide to those of us with lived experience in regard to MAiD and our end-of-life journeys and choices. In conclusion, let me say that although this information is specific to Canada, I hope it will also provide people throughout the world with an opportunity to begin conversations about their own end-of-life journeys and their right to die with dignity on their own terms. I've been fortunate enough to have been able to support people in Australia and New Zealand as they fought for legislation that would allow people in their regions to die with dignity through a medically assisted death. I hope that my books, Agenda Warrior and MAiD Musings, A Widow's Reflections, will provide you with a more in-depth view of my personal experiences with chronic pain and my husband's end-of-life journey, as well as my own. During my many presentations, interviews, and media participations on radio and TV, I have tried to stress how important it is for those of us with lived experience in this area to become a community and share our lived experience. I created a Facebook page called MAiD Together, a Communal Voice, for those of us who wanted to share our personal experiences and work together to influence the government to make changes to current MAiD legislation. I'm proud to say that our members had success in this matter twice since our founding. Always remember, every voice counts. Together we can make changes. I have made every effort to make sure the information I have shared has been both true and accurate. Please contact me if I have inadvertently made any errors or omissions. I will be pleased to make corrections or add pertinent information promptly. If you have found the content of this video series helpful, please share it with loved ones and friends. Let's get this conversation started. Knowledge is power. We all deserve the right to die with the best end-of-life journey we can, and ultimately, to die with dignity on our own terms. A special thank you to my youngest son, Peter Britton, for making the filming and editing of this series possible. Peter, you are the best.